Today's session is going to look at stepping into your best possible self. And this particular session is quite dear to my heart because it looks at identity and our identity as a parent, and particularly the power that we have to change what we see right in front of us. We're going to look at this intervention called Best Possible Self, which looks at visualization, looking at where we are now and how that aligns with what we deem to be our best possible self if we're not already living that. I'm going to start with sharing some research. And this is quite an old research from the 60s. And it was one of the first landmark studies that made people kind of sit up and look at what were termed as a bit woo-woo and be able to say, actually, there's some science behind this. We don't know why, but there is some science. Let's do a little bit more research into it. And this is regarding a basketball study by Dr. Alan Richardson. And the study involved 3 groups of basketball players. And the first group were told to practice free throws physically for 20 minutes every day. The second group were asked to visualize actually getting the ball into the target, into the hoop for 20 minutes again, just visualizing, never touching the ball, never doing the actual activity, but just free throws, trying to get it into the net, and for 20 minutes. Group 3 didn't practice physically, or they didn't do the visualization. At the end of the month, they were reassessed, and those who were physically doing the free throws improved their performance by 24%. The group that just visualized getting the ball into the net improved by 23%. So that's just 1% less than those who are actually physically getting the ball into the net. And there was no difference in those who either visualized or practiced. What that shows us is that the mind is very powerful if it is put into an intent. So if we intentionally direct our mind, it can potentially bring us back what we want. And that is very, very different from things like the law of attraction, where it's not just about visualizing and expecting it to happen. This exercise looks at actually practically doing something, setting an intention and taking steps and action towards that intention. In this session, we're going to look at the power of your story. What are you saying? What's your narrative? And specifically, we're going to look at positive visualization. Once we go through that, we're going to explore your best possible self. And that is an intervention, which is drawn by positive psychology. And we're going to find ways to use this best possible self intervention to redefine the future or change the current situation around you. First of all, I just want to ask, what is your story? Are you aware of your story? In the context of cognitive behavioral therapy, which is quite well-known therapy, the inner critic is coined as automatic negative thoughts. Ants. They're referred to as ants. And these ants are moving and chatting away through the whole entire day. And what we don't always realize is sometimes between 80 and 95% of our day is a series of repetitive thinking patterns or the same thoughts going over and over and over again. And looking at that as a concept, sometimes we can become very removed from who we are. And that's something I'd like to explore a little bit more today. The study from Harvard University suggests that 80% of people experience negative thoughts regularly, and these can occupy our mind. And about 60,000 of those thoughts per day may be negative or repetitive. So looking at some of these automatic thoughts and what they are and how to become more aware of it. There's quite a few, I won't go through all of them, but some of these relate particularly to children, which is why I circled them. The catastrophizing. So seeing something much bigger than it actually is. And you see this with children all the time. Oh, it's a disaster. They wouldn't talk to me and now I've no friends. It could be ourselves by seeing something, let's say your child's grade going down. Oh, he's not working well, or something's upsetting him, when actually, it just might have been a bad day. So the catastrophizing is making things much worse than they potentially already are. Emotional reasoning centers around our thoughts and our own emotions. And that is essentially believing the emotions we feel. So if we're feeling in a low mood or down, or we're thinking something that's upsetting us, we see that as the truth, as opposed to something that's just happening, that's something that is fleeting and can pass. Also blaming, and we see this a lot with children as well. It's not my fault, it's them, they did that, or I would have done something different, it's all them, them, them. Mind reading, and I know that as parents, we often do these with our children, is we think we know what they're thinking, and quite often we're wrong. In fact, we often think we know what somebody else is thinking when it's completely inaccurate. So understanding if you fall into that trap occasionally, and we all do it. And then they're always being right. And I know that I'm this with my husband. I'm always right. And it takes a lot for me to kind of step back and go, okay, actually, maybe you are right. So the always being right, is that something that you fall into? So these are just some ideas of some common automatic thoughts that you might be falling into. And I'm aware that when we look at therapeutic practices, there's a lot of focusing on what's wrong with us, like, oh, these are automatic negative thinking patterns. But actually, if you're aware of them, they lose their power. It's only when you're not aware of them, they can take over and in some cases be quite disruptive to your life. So thinking about how aware we are and also what our inner narrative is, what we're doing to open our lens to what we're thinking on a daily basis and what we're believing on a daily basis. Because, and I'm going to speak a little bit more about this, your brain doesn't necessarily recognize the difference between what is real and what's imagined. And that's often why we can get very stressed and anxious and sometimes in low mood, because we're believing what we're thinking. And sometimes that thinking, we mightn't even be aware of it. This is one exercise we're going to bring you through today to bring some awareness to this. And we spoke quite recently about changing our narrative. It was in a previous session, it's actually recorded. And that's looking at your self-affirmations. What are you saying? What are you intentionally saying? How can you change that hidden narrative, the negative narrative, for something more positive? So we're going to specifically look at visualization, or partly visualization. And for anybody who's not familiar with visualization, it might seem obvious, but it's ultimately the pictures we have in our head, the visual imagery in your mind. It is often practiced, so it's repetitive. These things are going over and over and over again in our minds every single day. It's also connected to senses. So the more we connect it to the senses, the more powerful it gets. So we might see something and let's say you see a beach scene and you can kind of feel the sun on your face. That is using visualization and using your senses with it. If you see some amazing food, you can smell it. Lots of senses going on there. That makes it more powerful and imprints it even further in your brain by increasing the neural connections. There's a direct connection between mind and body, and some other studies on visualization, one from sports in particular, and Michael Phelps is a great one. He's also got ADHD. Michael Phelps uses it in swimming all the time. And what he's doing is he's mentally rehearsing winning, mentally rehearsing his stroke, mentally rehearsing what will he do if his goggles get water in them or clog up. So he has this mental rehearsal or visualization for all the potential parameters. So he's ready. Some of the studies looked at muscle strength, which is quite phenomenal. A great study over 12 weeks asked a group of people to do some muscle training. And after those 12 weeks, 13.5% increased muscle mass. And they were only imagining it. And then there was a control group, 8% of those increased in muscle control. So there's a certain placebo effect there as well. But that's certainly something to look at. And it's recorded that 97% of Olympic athletes report using visualization to improve their performance. It also works across academia, students writing about their future self. So they've written a letter to their future self saying, you've got the grades, that's amazing, how did you do it? And they're writing a letter, well, you've worked really hard, you spent the evenings, not on TikTok, but on your studies. And actually those individuals who are doing those visualizations are getting better results than those who don't do it at all. So it's across the board. It's in health, it's in goal achievement. Visualization can reduce our stress by up to 23%, reducing cortisol and adrenaline. So there's so many benefits with visualization. This is just a quote from Muhammad Ali. If my mind can conceive it and my heart can believe it, then I can achieve it. So it's not only about what we think about and what we visualize, but do we really believe that it's true? And that belief and engagement with senses makes it more likely to come about. I use a lot of visualization, and one has their own lens. And I kind of go, well, everybody can visualize, but they can't. So I thought I would bring a prop to share what visualization is and means. So we've spoken about the senses, engaging those senses. We've spoken about the picture in your mind. Some people find it difficult to visualize, but it can be a skill that can be taught. So if you feel that you're not great at visualization, the more you do it, the better you get. And a great way to start is something like a lemon, because you can smell it, you can feel it, it's very tactile, it's engaging all your senses, you can kind of hear it. And looking at that lemon and feeling it and squeezing it and smelling it and trying to hear it and engaging all of your senses with just something simple like a lemon, and then just closing your eyes and then feeling it and squeezing it and smelling it and hearing it. And then imagine cutting through it and tasting it. And that's usually the bit that gets people kind of, oh, yeah, I can taste that. Or at least my body is tasting it. I mightn't actually taste the lemony stuff, but I can most certainly wince because I know it's bitter or tart. So that is a good way of experimenting and building your skill set for visualization if it helps. For those of you who are new to this call, who am I? I am a positive psychologist, a positive psychology coach as well. I have 2 boys that have dyslexia, ADHD, and many other things, but we kind of stop putting labels. They are them. We got them the diagnosis to help them through school. But actually, for a living, they don't need the diagnosis. I've also got ADHD. And in fact, our whole family is neurodivergent. So we're all perfectly fine. Everybody else, it's a little bit different. And I'm in the middle of a doctorate at the moment. And the doctorate is centered around the efficacy of positive psychology coaching. And positive psychology is slightly different from clinical psychology because it's focusing primarily on what's right with a person as opposed to what could be wrong. So we're focusing on the good. And I've noticed that with my own children, who are a little bit more grown up now, that if I was in a place that I was not myself, not my best self, just a bit stressed, probably not looking after myself, which many parents don't do, and avoiding self-care and all of that, then I would see their mood starting to come down. So it was almost like that everything I was doing, they were mirroring very unconsciously. And I started playing around with it and doing it purposefully. So I would be horrible, not to them, obviously to myself, and that you'd see their moods lifting up. And then you would be really calm and quiet and, start doing fun stuff for yourself. And they go, oh, can I do that? Can I do that? So there's definitely merit in it, which is why I'm doing the doctorate on it. And positive psychology coaching can work for anybody. I work a lot in executive leadership as well. And we do a lot of work there and it's brilliant. But what I wanted to do is I wanted to get a very, very stressed community, which is parents of children with ADHD, because statistically they're likely to be 3 times more stressed because of everything they have to contend with, mostly social constructs outside the home. And I thought if I could get those very stressed parents and help them come up with something that works for them using positive psychology, whether that would make a difference to not only their lives, but also their children. And that's what my studies are around. I've also written a book last year. Sorry, that's a very, very blatant plug. And this is basically distilling a little bit more of what positive psychology is into very, very easy, simple tasks that you do 1 a day for 28 days. Not related to parenting at all, just about you and your own self-care. So we start with asking where your attention is going. Is your attention going on all the, dare I say, shit going on around? Or is it directed at something more positive? And I don't mean positive in the way that can be quite toxic. So it's not positivity for positivity's sake. We're recognizing that stuff happens that we don't like, but it's not drawing our attention. We recognize it's there, but we choose to go down a different path and try that as an option, as opposed to leaning into the misery that we might normally be drawn to. And I don't know if you've come across Napoleon Hill, quite a philosopher, brilliant man, great books. And he is another believer of the mind that whatever your mind can conceive and believe, it can achieve. And he wrote Think and Grow Rich. But this is not about pseudoscience. It's about practical tools to help you apply something in your real life. And Laura King created this concept of the best possible self. And her process was about writing about your life goals and seeing whether you could move closer to them just by writing and journaling. And then it was picked up by Sonia Lyubomirsky, and she expanded the intervention by adding in elements of writing and imagery. And that was starting to work very effectively. Writing was still working effectively. Visualization was working effectively, but together they were incredibly powerful. So what I would really like to do is actually, if you've got a pen and paper you can access, writing down rather than typing. And actually, let's do a version of this. You'll need about 20 minutes. And what you can do is once you go through the slides on each step, then just pause the recording and then move on to the next step when you've finished, when your timer has gone off. The first step is to think. Set a timer for 1 minute. And in this step, imagine your ideal future, just a year, 2, 3 down the line, no more than 3 years down the line. So imagine yourself in the future where everything has gone as well as it possibly could have. Just think for 1 minute, what's happened? What's different? And you can think about your career, your relationships, your family, your health, well-being, finances, anything like that. So just for 1 minute, I'd like you to just think about what that might look like for you. No writing or anything, just thinking. Okay, that's our time up on thinking. For those listening to the recording, set a timer for an extra 10 minutes. And as soon as you've started the timer, write about your best possible future self. So write, don't worry about spelling or grammar or repeating yourself, but start to focus on the details of your accomplishment in this future, your relationships, your personal growth, and identify what's happened. If you can you identify what's changed? What has had to have happened between now and then for you to have arrived at your best possible self in the future? And if you can, identify any steps. But if you can't, don't worry. This is just about writing and getting it down. So I'm going to set the timer now and then just free write. Okay, we're just finishing up that time now on writing. Our third step is now to visualize. And this is where you get some time to close your eyes and step into that best possible self. And this is where you connect with your senses. You're imagining yourself in the future, living this best possible self. Really think about how you feel, any emotions that come up, any gratitude that comes up. And in particular, think about what can you see? Can you hear anything? Can you smell anything? If you're dining out, can you taste anything? Engage those senses throughout your visualization. For those watching on the recording, you'll set your timer for 5 minutes, reflecting on how you feel, what's changed. Is there a gap between where you are now and where you'd like to be? And also identifying any actions or steps that you had to take to get to where you are in this future. Okay, that's our time up on step 3. So now it's about your reflection, and then you would take just a couple of minutes, as long as you need, to reflect on that exercise and settle in on how it made you feel. Did it make you feel anxious or happy? Those emotions are really important to name, identify, and sit with. But most importantly, it's understanding what's changed. Is it a realistic vision of the future, or was your vision having won 30 mil on the lotto and you're off sailing in the Bahamas, which you may not have control over? So identify where is that gap and understanding what were the steps that you took to get to that stage. What would have had to have happened? What changed? Was it something you were in control of or something that was an external force? And most importantly, is what you're doing right now aligned with that best possible self future? So are there things that are happening in your life now? Are you in an environment now? Are you in a state of being now that is misaligned with your future? And if so, what small steps could you take this week to move closer to where you want to be? And that could be even the smallest step, because little small steps build into big, amazing things. So next week, we will carry on some of this work by exploring gratitude, in particular for emotional regulation and understanding the link between the emotional brain and gratitude. And gratitude is an under-researched area within ADHD, but it is highly researched in other areas. And it's a very, very, very powerful tool to tap into, because what it's doing is it's refocusing your brain on all the bad stuff that's going on and finding things to be grateful for. That's wonderful for kids, but done in the right way, as opposed to kind of a schmaltzy way. The more you can link to science, practical things, what's happening in the brain works really, really well, because they can visualize it and take those steps. So that's it. I'm going to open for questions in a minute. I have a membership that people drop into twice a week, and it's all about finding tools to be able to maintain a level of positivity within your daily life, and especially if you are impacting other people, so children or leaders, anywhere where you have some level of influence over others. It is a 12-month membership because the whole year brings up different challenges, and having that year with the same people really kind of helps embed the practices that we're trying to do. That's just a QR code if you want more information about it. And if you want to talk about it, you can book in a virtual coffee with me just for an informal chat, no expectations, and we can just talk about what you want or need. And maybe you don't need something as big as this, and I can redirect you to other resources. I'll just stop my share now and open it up to any questions.